Imagine for a second holding the blueprint for a literal trillion-dollar tech monopoly.
Right. $1 trillion, just an astronomical number.
Yeah, exactly. But then you realize that this entire financial architecture relies on a single, completely unprogrammable variable.
Which is the crazy part.
Right. It relies on the human soul. Because, I mean, usually a business plan is just pure math. You look at the spreadsheets, the customer acquisition costs, the server overhead.
The standard Silicon Valley playbook.
Exactly. And an investor just points at a chart and says, there's our margin. That's how we go public. It's calculated. It's clean.
It's predictable. I mean, we are totally conditioned to want innovation to fit neatly into, like, quarterly projections and really predictable risk models.
But every so often, you encounter a roadmap that just shatters those predictable models entirely. And today's deep dive is exactly that.
Oh, it really is. It's wild.
We are unpacking a massive, sweeping manifesto. It's from a blog post dated April 20th, 2026. And it's titled, The Solara Era, AI-Powered Ambition, Human-Centered Progress, and the Road to Trillion-Dollar Impact.
It's quite a title.
It is. And the scope of this document is just staggering. I mean, it goes from the micromechanics of AI coding workflows to the hard-coded eradication of global poverty.
All the way to a highly specific pitch.
Right. An open letter pitch to an Indian news anchor to revolutionize global media. It's all over the place, but in a totally cohesive way.
And the ambition is really what makes it such a fascinating case study, because this isn't just, a white paper on software efficiency.
Not at all.
It's basically a unified theory of how the next decade of enterprise should be built. It proposes a completely new economic vehicle.
And what will keep you, the listener, hooked as we unpack this today is the sheer tension in the text. You have these hyper-technical discussions about API integrations and digital identity frameworks.
And they are sitting right next to deep, ancient mythological analogies.
Exactly. It is Silicon Valley scale colliding with ancient philosophy. It's wild.
It really is.
So to understand how we even get to these trillion-dollar valuations, we really have to start at the bedrock of the argument. The text argues that the baseline of human effort has just permanently shifted.
Yeah, a total paradigm shift.
Right. And it draws a really hard line between what we've known as generative AI and what is coming next, which they call agentic AI.
And that distinction is the engine driving this entire worldview. Let's look at generative AI first.
Okay, let's do it.
The text acknowledges that we've already entered a phase where creating volume is basically frictionless. And the author uses a really great personal anecdote to make this point.
Oh, the rapper one.
Yeah. They describe themselves as becoming a rapper. They say they can take a raw lyrical idea, and then within seconds, AI generates a polished beat, refines the cadence, and produces a literal studio-quality track.
Which is just mind-blowing if you think about it.
Totally. The friction of the recording process, booking the studio, finding a sound engineer, mastering the audio, all of that is entirely gone. They just have a whole studio in their pocket.
So generative AI is essentially like a superhuman sous chef.
Mm-hmm.
If you want vegetables chopped perfectly in half a second, it does it.
All right. It does the task.
Right. If you need a business email drafted or a line of code optimized, it's just there. But then the document pivots to agentic AI. And it treats it as a fundamentally different species of technology.
Because generative AI still waits for your prompt.
Exactly. It needs you to tell it what to do every step of the way.
But agentic AI is proactive within a defined workflow. If you can define the steps of a process, an AI agent doesn't just generate a single output, it actually executes the entire loop.
So it's doing the multi-step thinking.
Yeah. It can write a piece of code, run it, identify the error message, rewrite the code to fix the error, and then deploy it. All without a human hitting enter at every single step.
Okay, so to build on my restaurant analogy from before.
Yeah, the sous chef.
Right, so generative AI is the really fast sous chef. Agentic AI is like handing over the keys to the entire restaurant.
That's exactly it.
You tell the agent, run the dinner service. And it looks at the inventory, it plans the menu, it directs the sous chef, plates the food, and manages the tickets. It's a fully autonomous staff working in the background.
That's the exact shift in paradigm the author is talking about. But the blueprint introduces a critical constraint here, advocating for what it calls human-in-the-loop agentic AI.
Human-in-the-loop. I like that.
Yeah. The argument is that while machines can execute defined workflows with absolute tireless precision, they cannot possess intuition, taste, or moral judgment.
So the agent runs the restaurant, but the human decides what kind of culinary experience the restaurant is trying to create in the first place.
Precisely. The human provides the taste.
Here is where I have to push back a little bit on this premise, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because the document claims that since the friction of execution is now, as they put it, lubricated by silicon and code, the biggest problems in the world,
Yeah.
things like disease eradication or reversing climate damage, are suddenly solvable.
Right, because the execution barrier is gone.
But wait, if the AI agents are doing all the executing, like if the entire staff of the restaurant is automated, what happens to the actual human workforce?
The existential question.
Exactly. It's all well and good for a CEO to move up the ladder and just focus on the grand vision. But how does an entry-level worker ever gain the domain expertise to become a visionary if AI is doing all the entry-level execution?
See, that is the central anxiety of the modern economy, and the document actually addresses it by fundamentally reframing what work actually is.
Reframing it how?
Well, the underlying premise here isn't about making humans obsolete. It's about forcing a massive mandatory upgrade in human ambition.
Mandatory upgrade.
Yeah. Yes, the repetitive execution tasks are abstracted away. But the human doesn't just sit back on a beach. The human effort shifts entirely from the how to the what and the why.
Okay, I'm following.
If you no longer have to spend 80% of your time figuring out how to build the supply chain, you are expected to spend 100% of your time designing a completely revolutionary product that uses that supply chain. The human becomes the moral and creative compass.
So we aren't losing our jobs, we're just all being promoted to directors, whether we like it or not.
Essentially, yes.
But that actually leads perfectly into the central critique this manifesto levels at the current tech industry. Because if AI is suddenly doing all this heavy lifting and an entire company is freed up from repetitive tasks, what are these corporations actually supposed to do with all that surplus time and human capital?
Right. What's the next move?
Because if you look at Silicon Valley right now, the standard answer seems to be mass layoffs.
And this text is fiercely critical of that exact reflex. I mean, it goes hard. It directly calls out recent massive tech layoffs, specifically pointing to figures like Jack Dorsey shrinking his teams by half.
Oh, wow. They actually name-dropped Jack Dorsey.
Oh, yeah. Because the logic of the tech giants right now is basically, we implemented AI, we are more efficient, therefore we can maintain our exact current output with fewer people.
Which is just so unimaginative. And there is a metaphor in the text that brilliantly illustrates why that thinking is flawed.
The car metaphor.
Yes. It says, imagine for your whole life you've been walking everywhere. It takes you hours to get to the store, hours to get to work. And suddenly, someone hands you the keys to a car.
A total game changer.
Right. But if you use that car just to drive to the exact same places you used to walk to, of course you're going to get there in 5 minutes, and then you'll just end up sitting around all day with extra time and nothing to do.
Exactly. You aren't utilizing the actual potential of the vehicle.
The argument is that you shouldn't just drive to the familiar sidewalks.
Yeah.
A car allows you to trade those sidewalks for entirely uncharted highways.
It's a complete failure of imagination if you don't. The manifesto argues that when you gain a massive surplus of capacity through AI, you don't shrink operations just to save a few $1,000,000 in payroll.
Right.
You use that surplus to multiply your ambition by a factor of 100. You explode operations outward like a supernova into entirely new domains. The critique is that companies are essentially using supercomputers to do basic arithmetic instead of using them to model the universe.
Which brings us to the core entity proposed in this whole document, the Solara.
It's a Solara.
Yeah. So a unicorn is a billion-dollar startup. But this author defines a Solara as a trillion-dollar valuation company.
Trillion with a T.
Trillion. A company so massive and influential that its scale, quote, rewrites economic gravity itself.
And it is framed as the ultimate evolutionary leap of the corporation. Because attaining Solara status isn't just about scaling up some standard SaaS product. It requires a fundamentally different vehicle and a completely different operational roadmap.
Okay, so let's break down that roadmap. Because a motivational poster saying 100x your ambition is cheap, right? Anyone can say that.
Talk is very cheap.
But what does the daily workflow actually look like when your ambition is scaled up by a factor of 100? How does a team build a Solara? Because the text gets incredibly granular here. It lays out a highly specific three-part pipeline: the spec, the code, and marketing.
Yeah, let's look at the spec first. In traditional software development, a specification document is just a list of technical requirements, right? Like this button goes here, this database connects over
A
there.
very dry technical manual.
Exactly. But in the Solara framework, a spec means reimagining an entire industry from the ground up. And that cannot be generated by AI. It requires profound domain expertise.
And the comparison they use for this is just fascinating. They compare writing a true 100x spec to the way a great novelist dissects the human heart.
Which is such a poetic way to describe software development.
Right. But it makes sense. It requires years in the trenches. You need a founder who knows the absolute minutia of, say, global shipping logistics or healthcare administration, because only someone who knows the existing system that deeply can see how to entirely bypass its inefficiencies.
Precisely. The spec is essentially the human soul of the product. It's the vision. But once that spec is written, we move to the coding phase. And this is where the operational structure gets highly unconventional.
Unconventional to hell.
The blueprint insists that the code must be generated by two entirely separate teams working in parallel.
Oh, right. I found this so fascinating. One team is the visionary team, and the other is the execution-focused team. Break down the mechanics of why you would intentionally divide your engineering talent like that. Because normally you want everyone collaborating, right?
Normally, yes. But it's actually a psychological safeguard against the natural instincts of engineers. The text states this division is necessary to keep creativity from being strangled by premature optimization.
Premature optimization. Okay, walk me through a real-world scenario of that.
Sure. Imagine you are trying to build an AI that can live translate every language on Earth in real time with absolutely zero latency.
Okay, a massive world-changing product.
Right. So the visionary team is tasked with building the theoretical model, the absolute best, most flawless version of this technology, completely ignoring server costs or current bandwidth limits. They're just building the dream.
They're building the warp drive.
Exactly. But if you put the execution team, the pragmatic, optimization-focused engineers in the room too early, they will look at that visionary model and immediately say, this is impossible. It will cost $10 per second in compute power. We need to downgrade the audio quality and limit it to 3 languages.
So the pragmatic team will actually kill the innovation before it even reaches the prototype phase.
Yeah.
Because they are explicitly trained to minimize cost and risk.
Exactly. The innovation just dies on the whiteboard. By separating them, the visionary team builds the warp drive, and the execution team works strictly on figuring out how to make the infrastructure support that warp drive, rather than just telling the visionaries to build a slightly faster combustion engine.
That is such a smart way to structure human psychology. It makes perfect sense. So, okay, you have a visionary spec, and you have this dual-track coding system. Then you get to marketing. And again, the paradigm is just completely flipped here.
Totally flipped.
Marketing is no longer viewed as a mechanism for, like, shouting at consumers to buy a product. It is reframed entirely as a listening apparatus.
The exact term used is listening to the market to perceive adjacent spaces. It's about discovery.
Right.
Every single customer interaction, every piece of user feedback is treated as a scout's report from the frontier. You aren't selling. You are gathering intelligence on what the AI agents should be building next. It's a continuous feedback loop.
So if you're listening to this deep dive right now, the mechanics of this sound incredibly potent, right? Like a masterclass in scaling. But let's take a step back and look at the sheer economic reality being proposed here.
The math gets pretty intimidating.
It does. Because we are talking about a machine explicitly designed to generate trillion-dollar monopolies. If AI is doing all the execution and a handful of brilliant founders are reaping trillion-dollar valuations, that is a recipe for a terrifying concentration of wealth.
Absolutely.
How does society even survive the interim period before this promised age of abundance arrives? If left unchecked, a Solara would just become an economic black hole. It would suck up everything.
The text actually anticipates this exact dystopian outcome. It doesn't shy away from it.
Yeah.
And it addresses it with what I think is the most radical component of the entire manifesto.
A foundation.
Yes, a mandatory restructuring of economic gravity. The premise is that a trillion-dollar company simply cannot exist ethically without an inbuilt mechanism to eradicate extreme poverty.
And what's striking is how aggressively the text rejects our current methods of wealth redistribution. I mean, it explicitly says no to wealth taxes, no to relying on governments, and no to traditional NGOs.
Because the reasoning is entirely structural. Governments and traditional charities are viewed as simply too slow, too bureaucratic, and frankly, too inefficient to handle the sheer velocity of wealth that will be generated by agentic AI.
They can't keep up.
They can't. The proposed solution is to hard-code philanthropy directly into the corporate cap table from day one. The blueprint dictates that a foundation must own exactly 10% of the Solara.
Okay, let's really unpack the mechanics of that, because any founder listening is going to immediately say, wait a minute, if a foundation owns 10% of a trillion-dollar company, that's $100 billion.
It's an insane amount of equity.
Right. I am not giving up that much equity because I will lose control of my own company. How does this actually work on a cap table without the founder eventually getting fired by their own charity?
It operates through a very clever dual-class share structure. It essentially splits the economic value of the stock from the voting power. The founders retain the voting rights, meaning they maintain absolute total control over the board, the vision, and the daily operations. They cannot be outvoted, but they irrevocably assign the wealth portion, the financial dividends, and the liquidity of those shares to the foundation.
So it's essentially a parallel economic engine running alongside the company. The corporate side generates the revenue, and 10% of the profit just automatically siphons into a philanthropic vault, completely bypassing tax loopholes or shareholder debates.
It's automatic and undeniable.
But having $100 billion in a vault doesn't actually end poverty. How does that money actually reach a person who needs it? Because traditional charities spend so much on overhead.
This is where the technological infrastructure of the manifesto meets the economic mandate. The text mandates that these funds bypass traditional aid networks entirely. It relies on direct cash transfers. And specifically, it points to the Aadhaar UPI infrastructure in India as the ultimate delivery mechanism for this wealth.
Okay, let's drill down into that, because if you aren't familiar with the Indian fintech stack, it's really hard to grasp just how revolutionary it actually is. What makes Aadhaar UPI the silver bullet for this author?
It solves the ultimate distribution problem. Look at traditional aid. It relies on physical infrastructure. You're shipping grain, you're building clinics, you're relying on local government officials.
And that's highly susceptible to corruption and delay and massive overhead.
Exactly. It's incredibly leaky. But Aadhaar is a biometric digital identity system covering over 1 billion people. And UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, is an interoperable, real-time digital payment system.
Right, so it's not like waiting 3 days for a bank check to clear. We're dealing with international wire fees.
Exactly. Through this combined infrastructure, the foundation can ping a verified biometric identity and transfer digital currency directly into the mobile wallet of an individual living in extreme poverty anywhere in the country in less than a second.
With virtually zero transaction fees.
Zero friction.
And it does this based on real-time need indices, as the text says. So if there is a flood in a specific region or a localized crop failure, the capital moves instantly to the affected individuals.
It's responsive aid.
It creates a perpetual engine of upliftment that scales directly with the company's valuation. But I really have to play the skeptic here.
Go for it.
The mechanics, the dual-class shares, the UPI transfers, they all make perfect mathematical sense. But is it remotely realistic to expect hyper-competitive visionary tech founders to just hand over tens of billions of dollars proactively?
It's a huge ask.
It's unprecedented.
Yeah.
Historically, the titans of industry crush their rivals, amass their fortunes, and then, in their twilight years, they start a foundation to rehabilitate their legacy. This blueprint demands they give it away before they've even written the first line of code.
It is an enormous behavioral leap, I agree, but the document frames it not as a nice charitable option, but as a moral prerequisite for entering the Solara era.
A prerequisite.
Yes. The philosophy is bluntly summarized in the text. Consume all you want to consume and give away the rest. The argument is that if you possess the technological leverage to build a trillion-dollar AI, and you do not embed a poverty eradication mechanism into its absolute core, you are committing a profound ethical failure.
And that tension perfectly bridges us to the most paradoxical part of this entire blueprint.
Yep.
We've just spent all this time talking about autonomous AI agents, massive wealth generation, and automated digital cash transfers.
Yeah, very technical stuff.
It is a massive, cold, highly efficient machine. But the entire center of gravity for this document is a deeply, almost uncomfortably spiritual concept.
Yes, the soul. The text states emphatically that amidst all this crazy automation, the human being must remain the focal point. And it uses incredibly specific philosophical language stating, quote, "Human beings are souls that happen to have bodies and minds."
Finding the phrase, human beings are souls, buried in the middle of a venture capital roadmap detailing API integrations is just jarring.
It is entirely unorthodox for the tech space, but it is structurally necessary for the author's argument to hold together. The text draws a very clear hierarchy.
Walk me through it.
Okay, so physical technology, like cars and rockets, augment human limbs. Artificial intelligence augments the human mind. But crucially, AI does not possess a soul. Only the human being does.
Right.
Therefore, the determination of right and wrong, the ethical navigation of these massive monopolies, exists exclusively at the soul level.
The phrase used is that the soul acts as an, quote, inner compass. No dataset can program. No neural net can simulate. Think about what that means in practice. You can build the most powerful agentic AI rocket in the universe.
The warp drive we talked about.
Yeah. But without a human soul providing the actual coordinates, it's just a highly efficient missile with no target. It could go anywhere and destroy anything. The text calls these ethics the invisible handrails that keep the rocket of progress from veering into catastrophe.
It's a fundamental argument against pure technocracy. The author marries this hyper-capitalist ambition, trillion-dollar valuations, with a deeply humanist safety net. Ethics in this framework aren't an afterthought.
They aren't just PR.
Exactly. They aren't a compliance department you consult right before a product launch to avoid a lawsuit. They are the primary navigation system. You simply cannot manage Solara-level ambition without Solara-level ethics. It will rip itself apart.
Okay, let's ground this lofty philosophy in reality because it is getting very theoretical. We have the macro theory, the wealth distribution, and the ethical handrails. What does this look like when it actually collides with the real world?
Right. How does it manifest?
Because the manifesto takes this grand framework and applies it directly to reimagining three massive interconnected industries: news, education, and entertainment.
It provides a very concrete vision of how a Solara transforms a sector, starting with global media. The text outlines a plan for a news tech startup that completely dismantles the current journalistic model.
And frankly, the current model is broken, right? It runs entirely on the man bites dog philosophy. It prioritizes outrage, conflict, and panic because, well, that is what drives ad clicks.
It's an outrage economy.
Right. But this blueprint wants to invert that. It wants to build an engine that elevates the quiet triumphs. It mentions focusing on things like a rural teacher innovating in a classroom or a neighborhood inventor tinkering in a garage.
But importantly, it isn't just suggesting a change in editorial tone, like just writing nicer stories won't fix it. It demands a total restructuring of the underlying business model.
Oh, right. The monetization flip.
Yes. The directive is ads out, commerce in.
Okay, explain the mechanics of commerce in for a news organization. Because if you aren't selling banner ads or subscriptions, how does a story about a rural teacher actually make money?
In the Solara framework, the news platform becomes an economic bridge. When you read a story about that rural teacher's innovative methods, the platform allows you to instantly directly fund their classroom. Or you can purchase their curriculum or invest in their project. The newsroom shifts from being an elite gatekeeper of information to a global AI-augmented collective.
So it's participatory.
Exactly. Citizen journalists feed raw data streams into the system, and the AI agents verify, format, and distribute those stories globally, turning the news into a living, economically viable mosaic of human experience.
It changes news from a spectator sport, where you just read and get mad, into an active participatory economy. But a Solara doesn't stop at one industry. It inherently seeks out adjacent spaces.
The scout reports.
Right, and the text points to education as the immediate adjacent space to this new media network.
By utilizing the vast AI-curated data streams generated by this new global newsroom, the text envisions a revolution in personalized learning. The AI takes the friction out of curriculum development. It acts as a, quote, private tutor from antiquity for every single child on the planet.
Think about the scale of that.
Yeah.
It takes the kind of bespoke one-on-one instruction that was historically reserved for literal royalty and scales it to 8 billion people instantaneously.
It's incredible. And then the second adjacent space it identifies is entertainment, specifically the creation of video.
Right, dropping the barriers.
The blueprint argues that AI video editing tools will completely obliterate the barriers to entry in filmmaking. It predicts an explosion of content that will dwarf current platforms, creating a Hollywood in every language.
I love the imagery they use here.
It's striking, isn't it? It imagines a grandmother in the Andes or a poet in rural Senegal suddenly possessing the tools to produce cinematic epics that rival major studios.
It's an incredibly romantic vision of democratized creativity. But I have to play devil's advocate here again.
Of course.
If the barriers to entry drop to literal zero and literally anyone with a smartphone can instantly generate a 2-hour cinematic epic,
Yeah.
doesn't that just create a terrifying, completely unnavigable ocean of noise?
It's the paradox of abundance.
Right. If a billion movies are produced every single week, the inherent value of content just drops to zero. How does anyone find anything meaningful in all that noise?
That is the inevitable fear when scarcity is removed from any market. But the document's perspective is that dropping these barriers doesn't create noise. It reveals a new Pacific of creativity that has been artificially suppressed by the high costs of production.
Okay, but how do you navigate the Pacific?
The solution to the ocean of noise is the AI itself. The agentic AI serves as the ultimate personalized curator. The human being, the grandmother in the Andes, provides the raw emotional resonance, the soul of the story.
Right, the taste.
The AI provides the high-end production value and crucially acts as the distribution algorithm that finds the precise, specific audience who will be moved by that exact story.
So the human provides the soul, and the machine provides the scale and the targeting.
Yeah.
It is such a cohesive vision. I mean, we've gone from code optimization to trillion-dollar economic theory to global wealth redistribution to the total reinvention of human media. It is a sweeping theoretical masterclass.
It really is.
But then, the document takes a sudden, incredibly sharp turn. It completely abandons all this macro philosophy and becomes a highly specific, targeted pitch to one single human being.
This pivot is really what elevates the document from a theoretical white paper into a live, actionable catalyst. All of this grand theory culminates in an open letter to a specific journalist named Palki Sharma.
To give some context for you listening, Palki Sharma is a highly prominent journalist and news anchor. She's particularly influential in India, but widely recognized globally for her really sharp analysis of international affairs.
She has a massive footprint.
She does, and the author notes that she recently left a major network, First Post, and they are writing this open letter to essentially intercept her before she decides her next career move.
And the passion in this section is just palpable. The author mentions a rumor that she might pivot away from news entirely, perhaps to sell Solaras. They practically beg her, saying, sell saris all you want on the side, but don't quit news.
They clearly think highly of her.
They do. They refer to her as the Kapil Sharma of news, which is a reference to a wildly popular Indian comedian, basically signaling that they view her as a generational transcendent talent.
They highlight her profound domain expertise, stating they consume more of her coverage on U.S. politics and Silicon Valley tech than CNN, BBC, and Fox News combined.
That's a huge compliment.
Yeah, and they even specifically praise her nuanced reporting on the Gen Z Kranti in Nepal, which is a region the author seems to have a personal connection to.
No, it is really important we pause here for a second to address a specific linguistic choice the author makes when discussing regional politics in this section.
Yes, absolutely. This requires some careful navigation.
Throughout the section, the author uses highly specific mythological frameworks to describe real-world political figures. For instance, they refer to a local politician named Balin as the Laxman of the Ramayana and the Balram of the Mahabharata. They also refer to Indian Prime Minister Modi as Hanuman.
So we need to be explicitly clear here to you listening. We're simply reporting the contents of this document neutrally. We are not endorsing these mythological comparisons, nor are we taking any political stance on the figures mentioned.
Definitely.
The author just possesses a highly idiosyncratic lens, blending ancient epics with modern geopolitics to make their points. It's crucial for understanding the author's worldview, but it remains strictly their perspective, not ours.
Right. It perfectly illustrates the document's core tension, though that blending of ancient soul and modern structure we talked about.
Yeah.
But returning to the actual pitch, what exactly is the offer being made to Palki Sharma here?
The pitch is just, let's build it. Let's team up and launch the exact news tech Solara described in the manifesto. And crucially, they want to launch it as a multinational corporation from day one, but base its operations entirely in India.
And the strategic logic for basing a multinational tech giant in India is super compelling. It leverages the massive pool of elite engineering talent there. But the real secret weapon they mention is the economic moat created by PPP, purchasing power parity.
Let's break down how PPP functions as a strategic advantage for a startup. because it's huge.
Simply put, the cost of living and operating in India is significantly lower than in Silicon Valley. So, if a company generates revenue globally in US dollars or euros, but pays its operational costs and salaries in Indian rupees, their runway is massively extended.
Because the currency goes further locally.
Exactly. You can hire 5 world-class senior engineers in Bangalore for the cost of 1 mid-level engineer in San Francisco. The author argues that by offering competitive salaries adjusted for PPP, they can attract the absolute best talent globally while maintaining an incredibly lean operational burn rate.
But the pitch goes beyond just a clever economic arbitrage. It comes back to that ethical mandate we talked about. The author makes a hard promise. All money generated by the company within India will stay in India.
A locked ecosystem.
Right. Furthermore, India and Nepal will be designated as the immediate first beneficiaries of the 10% Foundation. Yeah, the wealth generated by this new media empire will flow directly through that Aadhaar UPI pipeline to the poorest citizens of those nations from day one.
It is a phenomenal value proposition, and on a personal level, the financial upside offered to her is staggering. The author promises her a significant share of the founders' pool, projecting that the sheer scale of the Solara will make her a billionaire in less than 10 years.
But of course, it comes with that huge philosophical caveat. They immediately hope she gives the vast majority of it away, reiterating their central mantra: consume all you want to consume and give away the rest.
Right, the prerequisite.
The author states they are hard-coding this ethical arrangement because without it, they simply couldn't justify putting forth their own best effort.
The imagery the author uses to close the pitch is brilliant, too. They describe teaming up as strapping a Falcon-Heavy booster to a career that is already breaking the sound barrier.
Which is a great line. But this brings up the most glaring question of the entire deep dive.
Okay, what is it?
You have an author who clearly understands deep AI architecture, global economic theory, and digital infrastructure. If you have the genuine blueprint for a trillion-dollar company, why write an open letter to a news anchor?
It's a fair question.
Why not take this manifesto to Sand Hill Road and pitch a Silicon Valley venture capital firm? Why Palki Sharma?
Because of the spec. Remember our discussion about what it actually takes to write the foundational roadmap for a Solara.
The domain expertise.
Exactly. You cannot just have a visionary idea. You must possess profound, unassailable domain expertise in the specific industry you are trying to revolutionize.
The author has the tech vision, the economic model, and the API integrations mapped out, but they don't know the soul of the news business.
Precisely. They recognize their own limitation. They need the ultimate human in the loop. Palki Sharma represents the soul of this specific endeavor.
It all connects.
It does. The AI can process the data, the dual coding teams can build the platform, and the foundation can distribute the wealth. But the enterprise requires a human pilot who possesses the moral judgment, the editorial taste, and the deep, established connection to the audience to actually steer the ship.
The author built the rocket, but they need her to navigate it.
Yes. The final line of the manifesto captures that sentiment perfectly. All that remains is for 2 determined souls to ignite the engines together.
We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by looking at how agentic AI removes the friction from human execution, fundamentally shifting our work from how to what.
Right, the mandatory upgrade in ambition.
We saw how that surplus capacity demands a 100x upgrade, leading to the creation of the Solara, a company designed to literally rewrite economic gravity.
We then unpacked the mechanisms required to prevent that scale from becoming completely dystopian. The mandatory 10% foundation, utilizing dual-class shares and Aadhaar UPI to create a perpetual engine of poverty eradication.
And we explored the paradox that all of this cold automation relies entirely on the human soul to provide the ethical handrails for progress.
We looked at how this framework reimagines news, education, and entertainment from a noisy cycle of outrage into a democratized mosaic of human experience.
And finally, we saw all of this macro theory distilled into a laser-focused pitch to Palki Sharma, asking her to be the domain expert and the soul of a new multinational media empire.
It really forces us to confront the reality of the technology we are currently building. Whether you agree with the specific mechanics of the foundation or the aggressive timeline, the document successfully argues that incremental thinking is just no longer sufficient.
And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. If you're listening to this, you likely possess expertise in something.
Everyone does.
The core belief of the Solara era is that AI is rapidly eliminating the bottleneck of execution. Soon, writing the code, Building the logistics and managing the daily workflows will be handled autonomously by agents.
The execution barrier is falling.
If execution is no longer your constraint, all that is left is vision. So look at your own career. Look at the industry you know better than anyone else. If you had an entire automated staff ready to execute your every command flawlessly, what is the spec that you would write?
What uncharted highway would you choose to drive down?
Exactly. What would you do if you suddenly realized you had permission to multiply your ambition by a factor of 100?
It's really the defining question of the next decade. When the machine is capable of building anything, what will the human soul choose to design?
Let that sit with you. We started this deep dive talking about blueprints and predictable math, but perhaps the future isn't a spreadsheet at all. Maybe it's just a canvas waiting for a 100x vision. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the Solara era. We'll see you next time.